Hello everyone, it is about that time for another tournament recap, and you know which one it's going to be. Of course, it's going to be the Global Finals recap that happened last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, depending on the release of this video. Whatever it was November 1st. It was a one-day event, which is a little bit odd, but there were still a ton of games. They just all were packed into one single day. As usual, we'll start off from the beginning. We're going to do the entire round of 8, the entire round of 4, and of course the finals. But first, with the round of 8, determined from the previous week's round of 16, our first match was Cyril versus Sue. Sue and Cyril start the round of 8 off strong with a few amazing Zerg versus Zerg games. Unfortunately, it was just a few games. Despite showcasing everything that makes ZVZ exciting, back and forth battles, tech swaps, concaves, lurkers, mutas, everything, Cyril did the thing, and was just a bit better every time. That seems to be his thing. In game 2, Sue tried to play around with Nidus Worms, was blocked at every path. Despite failing on that front, Sue brings it up to the late game with some weird muta vs muta action, but was out late gamed with Cyril's better upgrades and his lurkers. Sue didn't even give us the final fight. He just tapped out. For game number 3, it gave us another long back and forth ZVZ from the Baneling phase all the way to the Viper Lurker phase. More Nidus Worms were used, but Cyril swatted them down while keeping his eye on the late game and eventually netting him a victory and a 3-0 score over Sue. For our next round of 8 match, we have ourselves a ZVP Foreigner versus Korean. It's Rainer versus Trap. For game number 1, things start off with an Archon drop backed up with a handful of Warpins, which Rainer dealt with about as last second as possible, but he did deal with it. The game accelerated quickly to the late game on Thunderbird and ended in Rainer's favor after his Broodlords made an appearance. For game number 2, on Acropolis, Rainer brought out upgraded Lings with a Spire really starting things off. After an attack that looked like it would end the game, Trap brought it back to the late game. After a few battles with their late game army, we had a weird moment.
Oh! It was an offensive recall! Where's this recall going to go to? It's going everywhere! The Vipers have pulled the mothership out of position.
What?
Was this actually a good play?
I don't know if this is good. I mean, the Broodlords are very exposed.
Did abducting the mothership actually help? I'm not completely sure, but it did put Rainer in the lead, and he kept with it to take the 2-0. Game 3 on Disco Bloodbath finally gave us the devastating PvZ push that proved Rainer can bleed. After letting Trap up to his natural ramp, it was pretty much done, and Trap puts a point on the board. On Winter's Gate, Trap tried to keep his momentum going with a Resonant Glaives attack that amounted to mostly Lings dying, but that is still something, right? While that wasn't the game-deciding moment Trap might have wanted, it still gave him a lead in resources lost. The really important battle happened later, with Rainer trying to envelop Trap's army, yet failing to actually punch through. With throwing away so many expensive armies, Rainer eventually ran out of steam and fell to the Protoss Horde. With the series tied up, the last battleground would be World of Sleepers. Trap once again showcased the Triple Oracle, his specialty, while Rainer decided to take a different path than previous games, and a nasty, dirty path at that. Rainer brought out the dreaded Swarmhost Nidus combination and immediately started wreaking havoc on Trap's main. Trap got pretty close to stabilizing, but took a few too many bad fights while letting his economy get wrecked, and basically all in at minute 12. Like many Protoss before him, Trap falls to the Nidus and falls to Rainer. Classic vs. Rogue ended up being quite a series. Buckle in for this one, guys. For game number 1, things started off odd with a weirdly placed Stargate. While this detail isn't that weird, it sort of set the tone for the rest of the series. It wasn't surprising to see Rogue bust out Swarmhost Nidus, of course, and it wasn't surprising to see it win, of course. What was surprising was the way Classic decided to deal with the threat of Nidus. In game number 2, Classic didn't just do an adept attack. He proxied his gateways and his robo, and suddenly showed up at Rogue's third. Rogue tried to hang on, but I was already set back too much, and certainly didn't have room to do his Nidus trickery, so Classic's plan to combat Nidus Swarmhost was basically not to let it happen. Game number 3 was on Disco Bloodbath, a map known for how big it is. Yet Classic decided to again go with the Adepts, except not proxied this time. They make their way across and don't find much. The next wave doesn't seem to decide the game, and the next wave is okay. But then suddenly Classic's army comes together, and it's big. But Rogue was able to weather the harassment well enough to hold against the big push, and the game goes on. The natural follow-up to such a weird game is Disruptors, obviously. But as Classic goes for a second push, Rogue is maxed out and takes the opportunity to pounce. Disruptors are good in chokes, but not so much against concaves. Eventually, Rogue finds the complete surround, and despite some amazing Disruptor shots, just has too much army. For game number 4, Classic pulls out the old faithful. Cannon rush time. Classic manages to secure his position in Rogue's base and starts creeping the cannons forward. Rogue technically stops the advance of the cannons, but isn't in a great position. As Classic transitions into a mortal Warp Prism, Rogue realizes he's SOL and taps out. Come game number 5, what have we seen so far? Pretty much everything from a PvZ, right? What can possibly top a cannon rush in both style points, as well as being as Protoss as possible points? A certain caster could probably think of something. Classic chooses not just a DT build, guys, but a DT Blink build. Everything on the line, and the Madman is able to snipe a hatchery with DT Blink and Recall out. Classic simply follows it up like no big deal with typical Archon drop harassment and solid macro, while Rogue struggles to recover. One final push is needed, and Classic advances on to the round of 4. The final series of the round of 8 had the potential to be the best. The classic matchup of Terran versus Zerg. Two great players of their respective races. The potential to be both a super scrappy and super macro series. The promise of a potential Serral vs Maru finals if Maru really was in top shape. Yeah, none of that happened. In game number 1, things set up nicely for the mid game. No proxies, no all-ins. Couple of medevac drops here and there, and even a Doom drop into Dark's main. Late game was easy enough to get to for both parties, but things would very abruptly turn in Dark's favor. After successfully catching Maru's army in the middle of the map, Dark takes map control and follows up with an overpowering push into Maru's fourth. While not technically killing Maru right then and there, Dark was in total control of the game and just chose when and how to kill Maru. Maru fought back as well as any Terran could, but eventually had to tap out. In game number 2, Maru tried to gain back the momentum with a rushed double medevac drop and Hellion push. Unfortunately, Mutalisks were not something Maru expected, and they not only pushed the attack back, but continued to snowball and eventually ended the game. Game number 3 was Maru's last chance, and he decided to bring out the Battlecruiser build. But, yet again, Dark would have something waiting for him. Roaches bust through Maru's main before the Battlecruiser is even out, tear through the SCV count, demolish the third CC, and basically they wins Dark the game. Maru tries to fight back and might have even had a chance if it wasn't for the Nidus Worm in the main. With no way to turtle, Maru is forced to tap out, and with him, the final Terran falls. Heading into the round of 4, we start things off with quite a banger of a match. It's Serral versus Raynor for the how many times has it been? And it promises to deliver on what ZVZ is best at delivering, which is variety and action, and two distinct playstyles just combating each other. At this point, Serral vs Raynor is a rivalry through and through. In 2018's Montreal, Raynor was one game short from being a part of the Global Finals. He had to win the one WCS he was allowed to participate in to gain the seed, and Serral stopped him. On the other hand, Serral was one game away from not having a WCS clean sweep, and it was so close because this particular player, Raynor, seems to get Zerg vs Serral. The series started with some typical ZVZ Lingbane pressure and developed into full-on Roach vs Roach action. Serral was the first to slap down the Nidus Worm and really put on the pressure, and very quickly took first blood. In game number 2, Serral tried to keep the momentum going with a heavy Ling pressure, while Raynor tried to skip Banelings entirely. Raynor ended up ahead on drones and kept the lead despite Serral's attempts to use his Lings effectively. With such an economic lead, Serral had few options and tapped out to overwhelming Roaches. For the next game, Raynor chooses a +1 melee build into Mutas, a style that used to trip Serral up quite a bit. Raynor continues with the Ling Muta, upgrading and eventually trying to run over Serral with numbers. Serral was close to holding on, but after losing his third, it was an uphill battle. Despite some pretty, literally perfect fungals, there was just too much for Serral to handle. Raynor once again brings out the upgraded Lings with Muta style, but Serral is better prepared come game number 4. With access to Infestors, Lurkers, Burrowed Roaches, and Vipers, Serral has the better army and a stable economy, and managed to do some decent harassment. Eventually, Serral is able to push, and Raynor can't hold. As if to show he could do it better, Serral throws an upgraded Ling Muta game at Raynor for game number 5, and it seems to do well. Serral is throwing Banelings at Raynor's economy and controlling him on 4 bases, and decided to try to end the game with Ultralisks. And that's probably where it all went wrong. Instead of transferring into his own Lurker Viper composition, Serral tries to make pretty much pure Ultra work. It does work a few times, but Raynor clearly has a better army and has managed to get his economy back in order. Basically, surprisingly, Serral made not just a huge mistake, but one that was repeated, Ultras after Ultras after Ultras. Eventually, Raynor takes one too many good battles, and Serral is forced to tap out in the round of 4 of the Global Finals. On the other side of the bracket, we have a PvZ, Classic versus Dark. Classic was able to beat Rogue with some cheesy builds, and I'm not sure he's really going to be able to do it again versus Dark. And, well, if you're thinking the same thing, then you are right. For game number 1, Classic starts things off with a macro Cannon Rush, staying true to the cheesy side he showed versus Rogue. The Cannon Rush is held, but Classic isn't doing the weird stuff. A second Stargate is slapped down, and Classic starts up +1 air. Dark has his own plans, and springs a Nidus Queen Roach attack on Classic's 3rd base. Things get scrappy and weird, but Dark ultimately comes out ahead and takes game number 1. Classic starts things up quickly in game number 2 with a Resonant Glaive's Adept attack. It does pretty well, but the game continues and Dark pulls out a crowd favorite. Well, not a crowd favorite, but an effective build. Swarmhost Nidus appears and Classic is tasked with defending against something not many or any Protoss players seem to be capable of. To Classic's immense credit, he makes the game look close. Back and forth battles that could have been in his favor if a Warp Prism lived seem to keep the dream alive, but the Locusts keep coming. Classic runs out of steam and taps out. Finding success with Adepts in the previous game, Classic once again shows up with Resonant Glaives. This time he really invests in the attack, but it falls short. The natural follow-up to a failed 2-base all-in is Disruptors, and Classic tries to make it work at roughly half the supply of Dark. Kudos for style, but Classic is dead, and Dark advances on to the Global Finals. The Grand Finals. Raynor versus Dark. Korean versus non-Korean, and both with a lot to prove. Raynor has taken down the King, the guy who won at BlizzCon last year, and seemed to be changing things in favor of the non-Koreans. And Dark, well, he has the task of actually keeping that Korean domination alive. Should a second foreigner actually win the Global Finals, well, what could that ever mean? And Dark also has some revenge. He's been in the situation before and is actually looking to win this time. And ZVZ, well, that's an interesting one. European Zergs will say they have the better ZVZ, and Korean Zergs will say theirs is better. But perhaps this is the test. So what happened? For game number 1, the finals started off normally enough, but started to differ when it came to lair tech. Dark went upgraded Lings and mass Muta, while Raynor chose the usual direction of Roaches. Things get hairy pretty quickly. A successful bust into Raynor's 3rd base leaves Raynor's AA crippled, so he tries to use his Roaches to bring Dark home. It's not nearly successful enough to make up for all the damage, and while Raynor tries to hang on, it's obvious Dark takes game number 1. In game number 2, both players take the opportunity to macro on Thunderbird, and it looks like things will go into a normal Roach vs. Roach game until Dark throws down an Infestation Pit. That's right. The dreaded Swarmhost Nidus affects Zerg versus Zerg as well. Initially, Raynor deals with it pretty fine, but all it takes is one Locust Wave to change things. While hatchery deaths aren't the worst, Lurkers are. Raynor held on against the Swarmhosts themselves, but falls behind on the Lurker and Hive Tech. And once the Nidus and the Natural got cemented, things really started to turn bad for Raynor. Again, Raynor holds on for a time, but inevitably it taps out. For game number 3, Dark tries to continue with his momentum gained from the first 2 games and grab an easy 3-0. Luckily for the Foreigner Hope, Raynor sees the early pool early enough to start to mentally prepare, and his defense is, well, just about perfect. Things start to look up for the Foreigner Hope with a point on the board. For game number 4, Disco Bloodbath, Dark goes with a familiar strategy. +1 melee starts and Aspire shortly after. Raynor is going to have to deal with the same strat he faced against Serral, except Dark isn't going to make the same mistakes. Raynor tries to go for a Corruptor Roach defense, but doesn't stop his economy from being hit. Raynor survives the Hive and has a strong shot at bringing the game back, but Dark has a closer. Nidus Worm in the main with nothing to defend equals death for Raynor. The final map for Raynor to come back doesn't start off great. Losing out in the Ling Baneling phase directly affects Raynor's ability to deal with roaches in the mid-game, and Dark isn't just going for roaches. He knows how he's going to end the series, and it's a Nidus Worm. Not that Raynor had much going for him in this game, but maybe if Defender's Advantage were available, it would have been a chance. Unfortunately, the Nidus Worm pops up right in front of Raynor's third, and Raynor is unable to defend. Dark takes the 4-1 and becomes the world champion, and might have just proven that Korean ZVZ is still the best. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do consider giving me a subscribe down below on YouTube, and also check me out on my Twitch, twitch.tv/ZombieGrub. I stream every day of the week, StarCraft 2 and other games. Thanks for watching, everyone, and see you later.